This is a big enough crowd. Candidates are going to wish they weren't doing interviews with me remotely. They're going to wish they were out here campaigning. But we wouldn't be doing a Meet the Midterm Voters tour of swing states without visiting America's eternal swing state. It's Florida. It'll be in our tombstone. But as we told you earlier, polls in the Sunshine State have taken on a blue tint in recent days. Joining me now from Miami is the Tallahassee mayor and the nominee for the Democratic Party for governor of Florida. We've got a lot of fans out here, Andrew Gillum.
Hey, everybody.
I was just going to say, I don't think they're here to see me, sir. I think they were hoping to get getting to see you. But let me, I'm going to start off with
Chuck,
a bit of news.
I'm oddly enough down here in the area I grew up in Richmond Heights. I used to play football on this field out here. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but I'm enjoying being back home.
I have a feeling I lost football games in Pop Warner on that very field because I remember doing that. I was in K-Land, but I have no doubt. Let me ask you about some news of the day here having to do with this FBI investigation and the fact that there is now some text messages that indicate this issue of who paid for these Hamilton tickets, and did you ever pay for these tickets, or were these freebies? Can you clear this up once and for all?
Well, yeah. I mean, so today's news was no news for us at all. I always knew that if we were able to connect in New York, we would go and see Hamilton. When I got to the theater, my brother handed me the ticket. The idea that I accepted a gift never came to me. What I've tried to do throughout this whole process is be as open and transparent as I possibly can be. I understand that my opponent is attempting as best he can to muddy the waters here. And again, I'm sorry that he doesn't have a plan for the state of Florida and therefore has worked extremely hard to distract. But I think what Florida voters need to know about me is that for 15 years, I've served honorably, respectably, and have served my community without so much as a stain on my record or on my name until I decided to run for governor. But that's okay. We're going to push through it, and we're going to win this race.
How would you have handled this differently in hindsight?
Well, it's a good question. I think in hindsight, obviously, you would be much more circumspect about anybody who comes around you. I never, frankly, feared for people coming into my space because I never assumed people to have negative or ill intentions toward me. That had never been the case really up to this point. And if I had to do it again, I would have been a lot more circumspect about the people that I allowed to be around me and to come into my space. But you know what? You live and you learn and you move on. I've had the opportunity to grow from it, learn from it, and move on.
And is there any other, because I'll tell you, we actually, we canvassed the crowd. They came up with a bunch of great questions, but one of them was this issue, there's concern from your supporters out here that this FBI investigation could become a problem at the polls. Can you assure them there's nothing else out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely nothing out there that would in any way suggest that I've done anything illegal or untoward. My opponent will continue to spread, lies, quite frankly. Every one of his ads, as it relates to me, have all been considered and called false. Yet he continues to air them. In my opinion, the one test that you have to pass with Florida voters is you got to be able to tell the truth. And in my case, that's what I've tried to do at every step of the way. In DeSantis' case, he has spread lie after lie after lie. And in my opinion, that disqualifies him from the office. My grandmother always used to say, if you tell the truth, you don't have to worry about covering up for lies. I've told the truth consistently. Today's text messages and other releases by Mr. Corey only substantiate exactly what I've said up to this point. I stand by it, and I'll continue to stand by the truth so long as I'm breathing.
Let's move on to some other questions, some other parts of the campaign. You and Governor Scott, he's running in another race, but you and him ended up talking almost every day, I take it, during the aftermath of Hurricane Michael. How would you assess the state's response? What have you taken away from it? If you're elected governor, are there some things that you would do similarly? Are there some things you would do differently?
Yeah, one of the, I think, hallmark traditions of people here in Florida, certainly people who run for elected office statewide, is that when a storm approaches and when a storm comes and when our people are in any danger, we suspend with negative attacks and quite frankly, try to work more closely together. In this case, that's what Governor Scott and I attempted to do. We did talk on a daily basis in the lead up and through and in the aftermath of the storm. I appreciated his willingness to, I think, subside with politics as I did. I took my ads off the air, even though they were positive ads in that part of the state. He took his ads off the air. Senator Nelson took his ads off the air. My opponent doubled down with his ads, negative ads, as people were trying to flee a Category 4 near Category 5 hurricane. He kept his negative ads up that were untrue. And quite frankly, I thought he had a moment to show leadership and quite frankly, to show a little bit of bipartisanship that in times of trouble and times of natural disaster, we come together. A number of us chose to do that. Senator Nelson, Governor Scott, myself, my opponent chose the exact opposite course.
I want to ask you, speaking of some nastiness out there, and we're not going to play some of these, but there's some pretty nasty radio ads and some audio, some phone calls that are out. Very racist in its intentions, some gross stereotypes. Look, race is popping up in this campaign. The first time you and I talked on air, on the day you were the nominee, the issue of race popped up with a phrase that your opponent had used. What would you like to see? The Republican Party has distanced itself from this. In fact, they've all denounced this ad. Is there more, do you think, the Republican Party can do to help eradicate this style of politicking?
Well, I have to tell you, leadership starts at the top. When Mr. DeSantis became his party's nominee, he went on Fox News and told people not to monkey up the state by electing me, a phrase that is not commonly used so far as I know, certainly not amongst any of the circles that I'm in. And quite frankly, I think people are taking their cues there. What I think they ought to do is, quite frankly, stop the dog whistles, stop the bullhorns. The attacks on me, the false ads that are being running are all intended to, quite frankly, further a stereotype about black men, illegal, unethical, take things for free, monkey it up, jungle animals. I mean, those kinds of things. It's not hard to understand why neo-Nazis would take an extension of that and then take it to the next level of extremity. What I think they're doing, however, is they're grossly underestimating and misestimating the people of this state. The people of Florida are going to dismiss, they're going to, in fact, reject that brand of divisive, destructive rhetoric. We're one of the most richly diverse states in all of America. We're going to show them on November 6th that they have played their hand the wrong way.
Do you think that's
Florida
why,
voters want to hear what we're going to do?
Do you think that's why we've had 2 polls in a row that have shown you up substantially, frankly? A lead that I don't believe, and it's a surprising lead. Do you think you're that far ahead?
Listen, you don't want to ask me about polls. There wasn't a single poll showing me winning the Democratic nomination at all. Even the day before the election, I think the poll had me 7 points behind my closest opponent. As I've told our supporters, forget the polls. The only poll that matters is Election Day, November 6th. Early voting has already started in this state, and I'm encouraging everybody to get out there and vote. When we vote, we win. When our voters organize and get out there and vote, we win. And so forget the polls. I don't care about them. I want people to get out there and let their voices be heard at the ballot box. That's how we're going to win this race.
Andrew Gillum, Mayor of Tallahassee, Democratic nominee for governor. Thanks for coming on, sharing your views. They're even saying bring it home.
Thanks for having me.
Your message has gotten through to these folks.
Bring it home.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I much appreciate it. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.